The First World War, or the Great War, was truly a tragic chapter in human history. Its roots were complex, its reach was global, its methods were extreme, its machinery was revolutionary, and its cost to humanity was massive, its effects on the world everlasting. Millions lost their lives, and within this painful period of loss and grief, there were many stories of triumphs and adventure. Such is a story from 1917, set in the most unsuspecting of places on earth, an unseen tropical Eden in the Indian Ocean, the Maldives. Far flung from the frontiers of the war, yet this did not stop the Germans from deploying ships as commerce raiders in the Indian Ocean. In return, the British and the Allied forces sent their battleships to hunt for these German raider ships. Our story begins with a young British lad by the name of Guy Duncan Smith. Born in England on the 21st of October 1894, he was in his mid-teens when the family moved to California. On the outbreak of war, Smith, like many others, was inspired by the call of duty. He chose to be a pilot for the Royal Navy and was interviewed and examined at Esquimalt, the Pacific coast base of the Royal Canadian Navy. Accepted as an RNAS candidate on the 2nd of July 1915, he quickly returned to California, signed up at the Christopherson Flying School in Ocean Beach, San Francisco. Smith commenced training on the 14th of July, and by the 18th of September the same year, he was in Ottawa, sworn in as probationary flight sub-lieutenant of the Royal Naval Air Services, with seniority. He sailed for England by the month's end, and was soon posted to the East Indies and Egypt Seaplane Squadron at Port Said, Egypt. He arrived in June 1916. At this time the squadron comprised of 4 seaplane carriers, HMSs Ben McCree, Empress, Anne and Raven II, where Guy was soon put to work. During July and early August he was aboard Raven II, flying a short 184 on bombing and reconnaissance missions. The short 184 was a 225 horsepower reconnaissance torpedo bomber biplane. In early 1917, news of the German raider SMS Wolf, captained by Karl August Nerger, laying mines in the waters of the Indian Ocean, drove the British in hot pursuit. Raven II, under the command of C.R. Sampson, loaded with several short 184 float planes and a single Sopwith, was sent to search for her. To provide big gun support, the French cruiser Pothue was to keep her company. Raven II sailed from Port Said on the 10th of March, bound initially for Aden and then to the Indian Ocean, to fly searches in the Laccadive and Maldive island chains. It was said that most flyers found this to be a most exhilarating experience, as you could see for miles when in the air, while below you saw the bottom of the sea and hundreds of islands of all shapes and sizes, some above water, others being made beneath the sea, some day to rise above the waves. On the 21st of April, Lieutenant Smith and his observer, Lieutenant William Charles Abbott Meade, were hoisted out on a short 184, number 8018, to conduct a reconnaissance flight between Mali and Ari Atoll in the Maldives archipelago. A sudden storm sprang up, and the seaplane failed to return. The carrier searched for the missing craft until the 24th, but only found an oily patch and ship's biscuits on the surface. Raven II returned to Colombo and reported the 2 flyers as missing, believed drowned. The logbook documents from Raven II records the events of that day. It shows they were in Maldives doing seaplane searches, and records the seaplane number 8018 that failed to return from Ari Atoll. They continued the search and later concluded that Flight Lieutenant Smith, age 22, Lieutenant Meade, RNVR, age 29, believed drowned. 1 Lee Enfield rifle and 1 Rebly revolver NH stores lost in seaplane 8018. However, the two were still very much alive. Having tried vainly to locate the carrier in the storm, the visibility being very poor, the clouds were thick and black. As a result, they were driven so far ahead that the radio couldn't communicate with the carrier. Backwards and forwards they searched over the bewildering network of coral islands. They flew in the dark and managed to land in one of the most southerly atolls of the Maldives. The seaplane was grounded on the coral reef, and they had to wait for the tide to rise at midnight. They attempted to taxi through the reef to the open sea for an early morning takeoff. They manoeuvred slowly through the reef by using the light from firing the very pistol and from the flashes of the tropical lightning, but eventually they ran out of cartridges. In pitch darkness, they finally beached the seaplane and tied it fast to a coconut palm. It was raining hard and blowing hard, and the two flyers spent a miserable night waiting for daylight. When daylight came, they found that the receding tide had left the shore stranded high and dry, but an inspection revealed only minor damage to one of the floats and to the ailerons. Waiting for the tide to turn, they built themselves a crude shelter from palm leaves, and after a vain effort to climb one of the coconut palms, they shot down some of the nuts with the Lewis gun. They had no other food. In the afternoon they refloated the seaplane and took off. However, in the attempt to keep their clothes dry, they had stripped themselves to push the seaplane to deeper water, and forgetfully left their clothes on the island. They were as naked as Adam when they turned the plane northwards in search of the carrier. They had about an hour's fuel left, and not having sighted the Raven II, Lieutenant Smith turned the aircraft towards one of the islands in North Nilande Atoll and landed in a lagoon. They were able to make out a native boat on the beach. Plunging into what they took to be shark-infested water, they swam to the beach, intending to paddle back to the seaplane and somehow tow it to shore. But when they inspected the boat, they found there were no paddles. It was getting dark. They were extremely hungry and exhausted. Covering themselves with palm leaves, they fell asleep on the beach. At midnight they were awakened by three natives, the first they had seen. Arising from the sands, Smith bowed and greeted the islanders with the salutation salam, whereupon the terrified natives jumped about 3 feet in the air and sprinted away. Next morning the two flyers searched the tiny island but could find no other inhabitants, and so set about gathering the materials to make a raft. Later in the day, native fishermen appeared in the lagoon. Lieutenant Smith and Lieutenant Meade, after several attempts, managed to draw their attention. The fishermen, deeply suspicious of the two naked white men who had come down from the skies, turned towards their nearby island to gather reinforcements. A fleet of native boats arrived, and the two flyers swam towards the boats. It took a while and a lot of deliberation for the natives to allow them the two white men on their boats known as donis. The two flyers, after much trouble, persuaded the natives to help them tow the seaplane to the island, where the village was called Fieli. 11 donis were used to tow the seaplane to the island. The natives were still very wary of the two foreigners. They treated them well, giving them food and drink. Each of them were given a mundu to wear, a garment around the waist, but were kept inside a hut in condition of house arrest with other unmarried native men. The two flyers passed their time by an interchange of songs and dance with their fellow occupants, who were gradually losing their fear of the two strangers. The jolly natives offered chewing areca nuts and betel leaf, which Smith and Meade found to have a rather unpleasant taste and made their mouths pink. By the time the chief of the island found a Doni heading to the capital Mali, the flyers had almost taught the natives to sing the song, "Hello, hello, who's your lady friend?"
Hello, hello, who's your lady friend? Who's the little girlie by your side?
Even though the natives were extremely isolated, they were fast learners. In Mali they were taken to the palace of the Sultan, known as Lord of the 12,000 Islands, Sultan Muhammad Shamsuddin Iskander III. The Sultan was far less naive than their rescuers. He entertained them royally and garbed them in the uniform of his personal bodyguard. In 1887, the Maldives had signed a protection agreement with the British, and the ruling sultans had a functional relationship with the British, based in Colombo, Ceylon. The two flyers enjoyed their royal stay in the palace until a ship was ready to take them to Colombo, where they rejoined the Raven II on May the 6th. They arrived at Colombo on Sunday noon in Adoni from Mali, dressed in the gorgeous red uniforms of the Sultan's Guard. They both had short beards, and as they walked up the gangway of the Raven and saluted at the top, nobody recognised them. And they nearly got to their cabins before somebody finally did. And then they did have some reception. Commander Sampson was awfully pleased. They had given up all hope of finding them alive. The two were stricken from the missing list, and the carrier returned to the Maldives to pick up the seaplane that had been left in Mali. The seaplane was safely sheltered in a hut especially built by the orders of the Sultan. Taken aboard the carrier were gifts by the friendly Sultan: 2 goats, a young bull, 2 turtles, and many other gifts. Additional flights were made from Colombo by Raven II seaplane, but no trace of the wolf was found, and on May the 21st the carrier sailed from Bombay as part of an escort to a convoy of HMS Brisbane and HMS Exmouth, bound for the Red Sea. As for her quarry, the infamous German raider had been far to the southeast, while the search of the Maldives was underway. She eluded capture and managed to successfully return to Germany in February 1918. She had remained at sea for more than 14 months and had sunk 12 ships, aided by her seaplane. Lieutenant Smith was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross by the RNAS, which was printed in the London Gazette issue of the 20th of July 1917, and also awarded the French Croix de Guerre. By the time he left the Royal Air Force, he held the rank of captain. After the war, he is believed to have returned to the USA, married and had a son. During 1915, his father had bought land and opened a resort at Rio Nido, on the Russian River in northern California. His father died in 1923, and Smith took over the reins and ran the resort until 1930. Lieutenant Smith died of a heart attack on the 20th of January 1934. Lieutenant Meade got married to the daughter of Count Riccardi Cubitt, and was believed to have settled down in England. Smith described the adventure in the Maldives as quite a novel one. His story was published in various papers during those days. Rudyard Kipling, the famous author of the Jungle Book, wrote a short story using the flyer's adventure as a basis for his story, A Flight of Fact, in 1918. As for the natives from their beautiful atoll islands of the Maldives, the marvellous story of the 2 white men, descending from the skies, will be a tale passed from generation to generation.